A little girl's desperate screams about her stepmom locking her in a dog cage echoed through the neighborhood, but nobody believed her until that fateful day. The wealthy stranger's hands trembled as he unlatched the metal door, his next words forever changing both their lives. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Thunder cracked across the night sky as rain lashed against the pristine facades of Elderbrook's stately homes. In a damp garage on Maple Avenue, 9-year-old Clara Holt huddled inside a metal dog cage, her small body trembling with each boom of thunder. Her thin nightgown clung to bruised knees as water dripped steadily from a leaking pipe overhead, forming a small puddle beneath her. The garage reeked of bleach and mildew, a nauseating combination that burned Clara's nostrils. She had been there since dinner, 6 hours at least, after spilling a glass of milk at the table. Her throat was raw from crying, her fingers numb from clutching the cold metal bars. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. Then, as lightning illuminated the garage through a small window, something in Clara broke. She rattled the cage door with all her might and screamed into the darkness. "Stepmom locked me in the dog cage all night." Her desperate cry echoed through the garage, but Clara knew no one would hear. The neighbors' houses stood too far away, separated by manicured lawns and privacy hedges, one of the reasons Monica had chosen this neighborhood. Inside the main house, Monica moved with practiced precision through the living room. She adjusted a crystal vase of fresh-cut roses, straightened a throw pillow, and wiped an invisible smudge from the coffee table. Everything needed to be perfect for tomorrow's home inspection. The social worker's scheduled visit was merely a formality, a box to check in the guardianship process while Clara's father served overseas. Monica smiled at her reflection in the polished silver frame on the mantel. Her public image as devoted stepmother to a military man's daughter had earned her the chairperson position on 3 charity boards. No one in Elderbrook suspected what happened behind the white columns of her Georgian-style home. She checked her watch, nearly 11, time for a final inspection before bed. Monica made a mental note to wake early and let Clara out before breakfast. The child would be properly bathed, dressed, and instructed on what to say to the social worker. What Monica didn't know was that the scheduled inspection had been canceled. Instead, Victoria Dane, the reclusive millionaire known throughout the county for her child advocacy work, would be making a surprise visit that very night. The philanthropist had received an anonymous tip about Clara's situation and had personally insisted on an immediate welfare check. As Monica turned off the living room lights, Victoria's sleek black vehicle was already turning onto their street, wipers fighting against the torrential downpour, heading straight for the house where a little girl waited, forgotten in a cage. The garage door creaked open, letting in a sliver of moonlight that cut through the darkness. Victoria Dane stood frozen in the doorway, her elegant silhouette a stark contrast to the squalid scene before her. Her face drained of color as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, revealing what she had initially refused to believe. A small child crammed inside a metal dog cage. "Dear God," Victoria whispered, her manicured hand flying to her mouth. Clara Holt cowered in the corner of the cage, her nightgown soaked from the leaking pipe above. Her tiny frame trembled, bruises visible on her knees and arms. The philanthropist's designer heels clicked sharply against the concrete as she rushed forward, dropping to her knees without regard for her expensive clothing. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm here to help you," Victoria said, her voice gentle despite the rage building inside her. Her fingers fumbled with the latch, cursing under her breath as she struggled with the rusty mechanism. The little girl's eyes, wide with fear and confusion, watched Victoria's every move. When the cage door finally swung open, Clara didn't immediately move, as if expecting some cruel trick. Victoria extended her hand, palm up. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." When Clara still hesitated, the millionaire's composure cracked. Tears welled in her eyes as memories of her own childhood in foster care surged forward. The helplessness, the desperate need for someone, anyone, to see her pain. "You're not an animal," Victoria said, her voice breaking with emotion. "You're mine now." The words hung in the damp air between them. Slowly, Clara reached out and placed her small hand in Victoria's. The moment their fingers touched, something shifted in the atmosphere of the garage, a promise made without further words. Neither noticed the social worker who had followed Victoria after receiving an anonymous tip. Standing quietly in the shadows, she captured the entire exchange on her smartphone. Victoria kneeling in designer clothing before the cage, Clara's bruised face illuminated by the phone's flash. their hands connecting in a moment of profound human connection. The social worker knew what this image would do. By morning, it would spread across Elderbrook like wildfire, then beyond the manicured lawns and pristine facades of the affluent community. Questions would be asked. Outrage would follow. The carefully constructed reputation Monica had built would begin to crumble. As Victoria wrapped her cashmere coat around Clara's shivering shoulders, she had no idea that this moment would not only change the little girl's life, but would also expose the darkest secrets hidden behind Elderbrook's white columns and picture-perfect smiles. Clara Holt stood frozen in the doorway of Victoria Dane's estate, clutching a small backpack containing everything she now owned. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating spaces larger than any room she had ever lived in. The social worker who had accompanied her squeezed her shoulder gently before departing, leaving Clara alone with her rescuer and an unfamiliar future. "Your room is upstairs," Victoria said softly, careful not to tower over the child. "You can change anything you don't like about it." The girl's eyes widened at this notion. The concept of choice was foreign after months of punishment for the smallest infractions. She followed the philanthropist up a sweeping staircase, her fingers barely grazing the polished banister. The bedroom was bathed in natural light, with pale blue walls and a window seat overlooking gardens. Clara approached it cautiously, as if expecting the comfort to be yanked away at any moment. "I'll be downstairs when you're ready," Victoria said, respecting the child's need for space. Jasmine, who had been Victoria's head of staff for nearly 8 years, maintained a detailed log of Clara's adjustment. Day 3. Ate half her breakfast, startled when door closed too loudly. Drew with colored pencils for 40 minutes. These notes would become crucial documentation for the custody hearings that loomed ahead. At night, Victoria often found Clara sleeping on the floor beside her bed rather than in it. The philanthropist recognized the behavior from her own childhood in foster care. Beds felt too exposed, too vulnerable. Without comment, she would gently lift the sleeping child and tuck her beneath the covers. Outside the estate's gates, reporters gathered daily. The viral photo of Victoria kneeling before Clara's cage had ignited public outrage, with speculation running rampant about Monica's treatment of her stepdaughter. The estate's phone rang constantly with interview requests and offers of support. "We need to shield her from this circus," Jasmine advised, drawing the curtains against telephoto lenses. "Judge Sims will be watching how we handle her privacy." Clara began to establish tiny routines, a tentative reaching for normalcy. She arranged her few possessions with precise care. She waited to be told when to eat, when to speak, when to move. One morning, Victoria found her standing beside the refrigerator, visibly hungry but unwilling to open it without permission. "Everything here is yours, too," the woman said, opening the door wide. "You never need to ask." Clara's hand trembled as she reached for an apple, a small act of independence that Jasmine noted in her growing file of progress. The road ahead would be long, but in this sunlit sanctuary, healing had quietly begun. Monica's fingers flew across her smartphone screen with practiced precision. 3 days after Clara had been taken from her home, Monica launched her counterattack with the same meticulous attention she applied to her charity galas. The first post appeared on her social media accounts at precisely 9 in the morning. A tearful selfie captioned with heartbreak over her troubled stepdaughter and the unwarranted intervention by Victoria Dane. "Clara has always needed special attention," Monica wrote, her words carefully crafted to elicit sympathy while planting seeds of doubt. "Her behavioral issues have been documented for years. This wealthy woman with no children of her own has become unhealthily fixated on my little girl." By noon, the narrative had spread throughout Elderbrook's elite circles. Monica sat in her immaculate living room, the same room she'd been preparing for inspection when Victoria discovered Clara, hosting 3 board members from the Elderbrook Children's Foundation. She dabbed at invisible tears with a monogrammed handkerchief. "Victoria's own background in foster care has clearly left her unstable," she confided to Mrs. Patterson, who nodded sympathetically. "She's projecting her trauma onto Clara. I've only ever wanted what's best for my stepdaughter." The socialite's campaign was calculated and comprehensive. She arranged interviews with friendly local journalists, carefully selecting photos that showed Clara looking sullen or difficult alongside images of herself volunteering at community events. Her ex-husband remained unreachable overseas, conveniently unable to contradict her version of events. At the Elderbrook Country Club, whispers followed the clinking of ice in crystal glasses. "I always thought that Dane woman was odd," remarked one board member to another. "Living alone in that enormous estate. Now suddenly, She wants to play mother? Monica leveraged every connection she'd cultivated over years of charity work and social climbing. Judge Sims's wife received a personal call, ostensibly to check on her recent surgery, but skillfully steered toward discussion of the unfortunate misunderstanding with Clara. Behind closed doors at her exclusive spa, Monica met with her attorney. "We need to focus on Victoria's lack of parenting experience," she instructed, her voice steady despite the stakes, "and emphasize Clara's history of attention-seeking behavior." As evening fell across Elderbrook's manicured lawns, Monica's phone buzzed with messages of support from influential community members. Her public persona remained flawless, the concerned, devoted stepmother fighting against a wealthy eccentric who had overstepped boundaries. What the community couldn't see was how her hands trembled slightly when she set down her device, or how she avoided looking at the closed door of Clara's empty bedroom. In Victoria Dane's sunlit studio, Clara Holt held a paintbrush for the first time in months. Her small fingers trembled at first, unused to freedom after so many nights confined in that terrible cage. Victoria had converted the east wing of her estate into an art space specifically for the child, filling it with canvases, watercolors, and soft drawing pencils that wouldn't snap under pressure. "There are no wrong ways to make art here," Victoria told her, keeping a respectful distance as the girl explored the supplies. "This room is yours whenever you need it." Clara started with hesitant lines, barely pressing the charcoal against paper. By the third day, her strokes grew bolder, more deliberate. Jasmine noticed the change during her morning documentation, quietly noting how Clara's shoulders relaxed when surrounded by art materials. "She's finding her voice," the head of staff whispered to Victoria one afternoon as they observed from the doorway. "Look at how she's mixing colors now." What fascinated Victoria most was the recurring motif in every single drawing. A small fox, sometimes hiding in corners, sometimes prominently featured in the center. The creature appeared in landscapes, in abstract swirls of color, even in what seemed to be family portraits. Always the same fox, with the same distinctive markings and alert eyes. "It's beautiful," Victoria commented one day, carefully sitting beside Clara at the work table. "Your fox friend appears in all your pictures." Clara didn't respond verbally, but she didn't flinch away either. Progress that Jasmine dutifully recorded in her daily notes. The studio became Clara's sanctuary. The gentle sound of brushes swishing in water jars and charcoal scratching against textured paper replaced the oppressive silence she'd known at Monica's perfectly maintained home. There, art had been restricted to pre-approved coloring books and washable markers that wouldn't stain the imported furniture. Victoria arranged the completed drawings in chronological order along one wall. The progression was striking, from dark, confined spaces to increasingly open landscapes. The small girl's trauma remained evident in shadowy corners and sharp edges, but something else emerged alongside it: resilience. "She's processing," Elena told Victoria during a private call. Art therapy was the right choice. By the fourth week, Clara had filled an entire sketchbook. When Victoria presented her with a new one, bound in soft blue fabric, the child looked directly into her eyes for 3 full seconds, their longest connection yet. That night, Clara left a drawing outside Victoria's bedroom door, a fox, and a tall woman standing together under a protective tree. It wasn't just art anymore. It was communication. It was trust beginning to bloom. Victoria Dane couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Monica's story. After 3 weeks of caring for Clara, she'd noticed discrepancies in what Monica claimed the child owned versus what she'd arrived with. The philanthropist's instincts, honed through years of advocacy work, were screaming that there was more to uncover. "I need to dig deeper," Victoria told Jasmine one evening, as they reviewed Clara's progress notes. Her head of staff nodded in agreement, having harbored similar suspicions. Victoria hired a discreet investigator who tracked Monica's movements and discovered she made monthly visits to a storage facility on the outskirts of Elderbrook. The following day, Victoria obtained a court order to access the unit, citing concerns about Clara's missing possessions. The metal door rolled up with a thunderous clatter. Victoria stood frozen at the threshold, her elegant composure momentarily abandoned. Inside lay the physical evidence of Monica's deception. Boxes neatly labeled with Clara's name, containing clothes, toys, and books that the little girl had supposedly outgrown or lost. "She told Clara these things were gone," Victoria whispered, running her fingers over a well-loved stuffed fox that matched the recurring motif in the child's drawings. The plush toy's fur was worn thin from years of holding and loving, but it was a shoebox tucked in the corner that truly shattered Victoria's control. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to Clara in the same handwriting, all bearing military postmarks. Victoria pulled one out with trembling hands and read the opening line. "My dearest Clara Bear, I miss you more than all the stars in the sky." Each envelope was sealed, never opened. Major Holt's words of love and reassurance had never reached his daughter. Instead, Monica had hidden them away, deliberately severing the connection between father and child. "She told Clara her father never wrote," Victoria said, her voice hardening as she carefully replaced the letter. "She made that little girl believe she was forgotten." Jasmine documented everything with her smartphone, methodically photographing each item as evidence. "This changes everything," she said quietly. Victoria nodded, gathering the letters into her handbag. The discovery had transformed her mission from protection to justice. Monica hadn't merely been neglectful. She had systematically isolated Clara, erasing her past and her connections. That night, after Clara had fallen asleep, Victoria sat in her study, reading through each letter. Major Holt's words painted a picture of a father desperately missing his daughter, unaware of her suffering. By morning, Victoria's determination had crystallized into an unshakable resolve. Monica would not only lose custody, she would answer for every lie, every manipulation, every moment of love she had stolen from Clara Holt. The chandeliers of Elderbrook's Heritage Hall cast a warm glow over the intimate gathering of 30 child advocates. Victoria Dane had organized this closed event specifically as a safe space for Clara to share her experience. The girl stood at the small podium, wearing a navy blue dress that Victoria had helped her choose that morning. Her artwork, including the fox drawings that had become her signature, decorated the walls behind her. "You can do this," Victoria whispered, giving Clara's shoulder a gentle squeeze before stepping back. Clara Holt looked out at the expectant faces. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. She clutched the edge of the podium, her knuckles whitening. The silence stretched uncomfortably as sympathetic smiles began to fade into concerned glances. Clara managed before her voice cracked. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked desperately toward Victoria. The philanthropist started forward, but Clara was already rushing off the small stage, disappearing through the side door. Victoria found her curled up on a window seat in the adjacent library, arms wrapped tightly around her knees. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered, not meeting Victoria's eyes. "I wanted to be brave like you." Victoria sat beside her, careful to maintain the space Clara needed. "Bravery isn't about never feeling afraid," she said softly. "It's about feeling afraid and trying anyway. And you tried." Back at the estate that evening, Victoria paced the terrace, replaying the moment over and over. Jasmine brought her tea, concern evident in her expression. "She needs more time," the head of staff said gently. "Recovery isn't linear." Elena arrived shortly after, having witnessed the event from the audience. Victoria's childhood friend settled into a garden chair, her practical nature a counterbalance to Victoria's intensity. "You're pushing too hard," Elena said, accepting the cup Jasmine offered. "This isn't about fixing your past through her." Victoria stiffened. "That's not what I'm doing." "Isn't it?" Elena's voice remained gentle but firm. "You escaped the system. You built this life. But Victoria, Clara isn't you, and her healing won't look like yours." The words stung with truth. Victoria remembered her own nightmares, the years it took to trust again after foster care. "I just want her to find her voice," Victoria admitted. "She will," Elena assured her. "But on her timeline, not yours." Later that night, Victoria found a drawing slipped under her door, a small fox standing at a microphone, speech bubble empty but pencil nearby. The message was clear. Clara wasn't giving up, just asking for patience. Victoria tucked the drawing into her journal, a reminder that healing, like art, couldn't be rushed. The anonymous tip came in the form of a handwritten note delivered to the courthouse in an unmarked envelope. By noon, 2 investigators had arrived at Serenity Springs, Monica's exclusive wellness spa nestled in Elderbrook's upscale district. The establishment, with its pristine white exterior and manicured hedges, projected an image of healing and tranquility. "We're here about Clara Holt," the lead investigator announced to the receptionist, who immediately called Monica from her private office. Monica appeared moments later, her composure flawless, despite the intrusion. "Clara has been a patient here for years," she explained, leading them down a hallway adorned with certificates and wellness awards. "Her emotional instability has required extensive intervention." The investigators exchanged glances. This narrative aligned perfectly with what Monica had presented in court. The troubled child requiring firm discipline, the concerned stepmother doing her best. In the records room, Monica's assistant pulled Clara's file with practiced efficiency. The documentation was immaculate. Detailed therapy sessions, psychological evaluations, and incident reports spanning 3 years. Each entry meticulously supported Monica's courtroom claims of Clara's dangerous tendencies and manipulative behavior. "You'll see, everything is in order," Monica said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to being believed. But as the investigators examined the records more closely, inconsistencies emerged. Dates of supposed therapy sessions coincided with days Clara had been in school according to attendance records. The handwriting on different evaluations, supposedly from different therapists, showed remarkable similarities. Most damning of all, several sessions were documented during weeks when the spa had been closed for renovations. When confronted, the assistant cracked under pressure. "She made me backdate everything," she confessed, avoiding Monica's icy glare. There were never any real sessions. The fabricated evidence painted a devastating picture. Monica had been systematically creating a false medical history to discredit Clara's potential testimony and maintain custody. News of the discovery reached Judge Mr. Sims that evening. The magistrate, who had initially viewed Victoria's intervention with skepticism, now sat in his chambers reviewing the preliminary findings. The falsified records challenged everything he'd assumed about the case. "This changes things," he murmured to his clerk. "Get me the complete file on Clara Holt." As the investigation expanded to review all of Monica's connections within Elderbrook's elite circles, the carefully constructed narrative she had built began to unravel. For the first time, the official story was being questioned by those with the power to act. The evening sky darkened over Victoria Dane's estate as a phone call brought unwelcome news. Major Holt's return had been delayed indefinitely due to complications with his injury. Victoria hung up with a heavy sigh, unaware that Clara Holt had been standing just outside the doorway, her small frame frozen in the shadows. Clara's heart pounded as fragments of the conversation replayed in her mind. Delayed, uncertain timeline. Recovery setback. The words swirled like a gathering storm. Her father wasn't coming home. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The thought ignited a primal panic inside her chest. While Victoria conferred with Jasmine in the study about how to break the news gently, the child slipped silently through the back door. The sprawling grounds of the estate stretched before her like an unfamiliar wilderness. Without a clear destination, she simply ran, her bare feet carrying her across manicured lawns and through ornamental gardens. The night air chilled her skin as darkness enveloped the property. Security lights cast long shadows that seemed to reach for her like Monica's hands. Clara ducked beneath hedgerows and squeezed through gaps in the shrubbery, driven by an instinct to hide, to disappear. Back at the house, Victoria emerged from her meeting to check on Clara, only to find an empty bedroom. "Clara?" she called, her voice echoing through vacant hallways. Panic seized her as she mobilized the staff. "Search every room, every closet," she instructed, her usual composure cracking. For 3 agonizing hours, flashlight beams crisscrossed the estate grounds. Victoria's mind raced with terrible possibilities. Had Monica somehow taken her? Had Clara run away because she felt unsafe? The philanthropist's own childhood memories of escape attempts from foster homes haunted her with each passing minute. Near midnight, Victoria ventured toward the farthest edge of the property alone. There, huddled against the garden gate, she found Clara. The child sat with knees drawn to her chest, clutching a crumpled drawing of a fox to her heart like a talisman. "I thought he forgot me," Clara whispered as Victoria knelt beside her. "Like before." Victoria gathered the shivering child into her arms. "Your father is fighting to come back to you," she said softly. "And until then, I'm not going anywhere." As they walked back toward the warmth of the house, Victoria realized something had shifted between them. In those hours of desperate searching, she had confronted her deepest fear, the helplessness of losing someone she'd promised to protect. And in finding Clara, she'd found something else too, the courage to be vulnerable, enough to truly love again. The courtroom fell silent as the footage played on the large monitor. Clara's reaction was unmistakable. At the sound of a metal cage door slamming shut in the background of Victoria Dane's estate, the little girl visibly flinched, her small body tensing as if bracing for impact. Her eyes widened with unmistakable fear, her hands instinctively covering her ears. Judge Mr. Sims leaned forward, his previous skepticism visibly wavering. The evidence of Clara's trauma was undeniable, playing out before everyone in attendance. Victoria sat with perfect posture, though her knuckles had turned white from gripping the edge of her seat. Across the aisle, Monica maintained her practiced smile, but a muscle twitched beneath her carefully applied makeup. "The child's reaction speaks volumes," the child advocate attorney stated, gesturing toward the screen. "This is not performance. This is not manipulation. This is the body remembering what the mind is trying to forget." After the hearing adjourned, Victoria returned to her estate feeling cautiously optimistic. The judge's expression had shifted during the viewing. Perhaps the tide was finally turning. Jasmine met her at the door, her normally calm demeanor replaced with urgent concern. "Someone's been here," she whispered, leading Victoria to the security room. The alarm was disabled for exactly 7 minutes and 23 seconds. The security footage revealed a slender woman, Monica's personal assistant, slipping through the garden entrance shortly after midnight. She moved with practiced efficiency, placing documents in Victoria's private study and tampering with Clara's art supplies. The woman then photographed the planted items before departing. "She's creating a paper trail," Victoria realized, her voice hollow with disbelief. "If those documents had been discovered..." Jasmine nodded grimly. "I've already removed everything. More importantly, I've documented everything she planted." She opened a folder containing photographs and detailed notes. "My background in child advocacy taught me to expect desperate measures. Nothing gets moved in this house without documentation." Victoria exhaled slowly, gratitude washing over her face. "You've saved us from a devastating setback." Later that night, Victoria checked on Clara, finding the child sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. A fox drawing lay on her nightstand, the colors brighter than previous versions. Progress, however fragile. As Victoria closed the door gently, she knew the battle was far from over. Monica's willingness to break the law demonstrated her desperation, and desperate people were unpredictable. The stakes had never been higher, not just for Clara's future, but for exposing the truth about what happened behind Elderbrook's pristine facades. The investigation into Monica's treatment of Clara took an unexpected turn when Elaine Winters, a retired social worker with 30 years of experience, recognized the child's face from a news segment. Trembling, she dug through her personal archives, files she had kept against department policy because something about them had never felt right. "I knew that little girl," Elaine told Victoria Dane during their meeting at the estate. 3 years ago, Clara's teacher reported suspicious bruising, but the case was dismissed before I could complete a proper assessment." Victoria leaned forward, her elegant posture tightening. "Dismissed by whom?" "The department head suddenly reassigned me. Said Monica had provided satisfactory explanations for Clara's injuries." The retired social worker's voice cracked. "A week later, I learned Monica had made a substantial donation to the department's annual fundraiser. This revelation triggered a comprehensive review of all complaints involving the Holt household. Jasmine, methodical and thorough, worked alongside Victoria's legal team to uncover 5 separate incidents that had been reported and subsequently buried. Each complaint followed the same pattern: initial concern, Monica's charm offensive, then administrative dismissal. She knew exactly how to work the system, Jasmine observed, organizing the evidence chronologically. Donations, gala, appearances, board memberships, all strategically timed after each complaint. A former housekeeper came forward next, describing how she'd been fired after questioning why Clara wasn't allowed dinner for 3 consecutive nights. Monica had threatened deportation, effectively silencing her. The carefully constructed facade began crumbling further when financial records revealed Monica had diverted funds from Clara's trust, money left by her biological mother, into her wellness spa venture. Judge Sims, initially hesitant to believe the worst about a respected community figure, now had concrete evidence of financial exploitation. "Her entire life is built on manipulation," Victoria told Elena during a rare moment of rest. "She's been doing this for years, not just to Clara." "And no one noticed?" Elena asked, refilling Victoria's teacup. "People saw what they wanted to see," Victoria replied, watching through the window as Clara sketched quietly in the garden. "Elderbrook prides itself on perfection. Monica gave them that illusion. As the evidence mounted, Monica's social circle began to fracture. Board members quietly distanced themselves. Invitations stopped arriving. The woman who had once commanded every room now found doors closing before she could enter. Monica's carefully crafted reputation, built over years of calculated charity work and social climbing, now balanced precariously on the edge of complete collapse, with each new revelation pushing it closer to the abyss. Victoria Dane stood in the gallery's reception area, watching as the curator carefully positioned Clara's drawing at eye level in the center of the main wall. The piece, a hauntingly beautiful fox with knowing eyes, had been submitted anonymously to the National Children's Art Exhibition by Jasmine, who had quietly collected Clara's most powerful works over the past months. "This is extraordinary work for someone so young," the curator remarked, stepping back to admire the placement. "The emotional depth is remarkable." Victoria nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She hadn't told Clara about the submission, fearing disappointment if nothing came of it. Now, as the centerpiece of the exhibition, the young girl's art would speak volumes to thousands of visitors. The following evening, Clara Holt stood frozen at the entrance to the gallery, her small hand gripping Victoria's tightly. That's my drawing," she whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. "It is," Victoria confirmed softly. "Jasmine and I thought your voice deserved to be heard." The exhibition catalog described the piece as an exploration of freedom and captivity through a child's eyes. What it didn't mention was the story behind the art, the cage, the abuse, the rescue. Yet somehow visitors seemed to sense it. They lingered before Clara's drawing, many wiping away tears. A journalist from the Washington Post approached Victoria during the opening night. "There's something about this piece that resonates deeply," she said. "Would the artist be willing to share their story?" Victoria glanced at Clara, who was speaking quietly with Jasmine across the room. "That's her decision to make, when she's ready." By the third day of the exhibition, Clara's fox had become a talking point on social media. Art critics praised its raw emotional power, while child advocates recognized the symbolism of trauma and resilience. Without revealing her identity, Clara's story began spreading through carefully managed press releases. Judge Mr. Sims saw the coverage on his morning newsfeed. The connection wasn't explicit, but he recognized the parallels to the case before him. That afternoon, he requested additional expert testimony for the upcoming hearing. In Elderbrook, the whispers grew louder. Residents who had once looked away now found themselves confronted with uncomfortable questions. Monica's carefully cultivated supporters began distancing themselves as public sentiment shifted. "People are listening," Elena told Victoria over coffee at the estate. "Clara's art is doing what courtroom testimony couldn't. It's making them feel." Victoria watched through the window as Clara sat in the garden, sketching another fox. "She's not just a victim anymore," she said quietly. "She's becoming an advocate in her own way." The silence that had protected Elderbrook's darkest secrets was finally beginning to crack. Victoria Dane sat cross-legged on the floor of the art studio, surrounded by Clara's drawings. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the careful strokes of color that filled each page. The philanthropist had noticed something peculiar. A small fox appeared in every single drawing, sometimes hiding in corners, sometimes prominently featured, but always present. "Clara," Victoria said softly as the girl entered the room, "I've been looking at your beautiful artwork. May I ask you something about them?" Clara Holt nodded, her small frame still tense with the habitual caution that hadn't fully dissipated despite weeks in the safety of the estate. "This fox," Victoria pointed to the orange creature in the corner of the nearest drawing. "It's in all of your pictures. Is there a reason?" The child stood silent for a moment, her fingers twisting the hem of her shirt. Then she walked to a chair and sat down, her eyes fixed on the drawing. "It was my mom's scarf," she whispered, "before she died. It had little foxes on it, and she would wrap it around both of us when I was cold." Victoria's breath caught. This was the first time Clara had mentioned her mother. "She said foxes were clever and brave," the girl continued, her voice gaining strength. "She said I was her little fox." Victoria moved closer, careful not to break the fragile moment. "That's beautiful, Clara. Your mother sounds wonderful." "I can't remember her face sometimes," Clara admitted, tears welling in her eyes. "But I remember how the scarf felt." "I understand," Victoria said, her own voice thick with emotion. "I lost my parents very young. In the foster homes, I used to hold onto a button from my mother's coat. It was all I had left. The philanthropist hadn't shared this with anyone in years. Jasmine knew parts of her story, and Elena had been there through some of the worst times, but Victoria rarely spoke of her childhood losses." Clara looked up, really seeing Victoria perhaps for the first time, not as a savior or authority figure, but as someone who understood. "What happened to the button?" "I still have it," Victoria admitted. "Would you like to see it?" The child nodded, and something shifted between them. That evening they sat together in the library, sharing memories, Clara of her mother, Victoria of her own fragmented childhood. Jasmine observed from the doorway, quietly documenting this breakthrough in her notes. As Clara finally fell asleep on the sofa, Victoria covered her with a blanket, her resolve hardening. This child would never again be locked away or forgotten. The shared grief had formed a bond stronger than any legal document could define. The financial auditor's pen hovered over the document, his brow furrowed in concentration. Something about Major Holt's signature on the guardianship papers didn't match previous records. After comparing it with 5 other authenticated documents, he was certain the signature had been forged. "This is beyond troubling," Victoria Dane whispered to Jasmine as they reviewed the findings in the sunlit study of her estate. The philanthropist's hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages of the report. "It gets worse," Jasmine replied, sliding another folder across the polished desk. "Monica didn't just forge the guardianship documents. She's been receiving monthly grants from 3 different children's charities, funds meant for Clara's therapy and education. Bank statements revealed a pattern of deposits, followed by transfers to Monica's personal accounts. Not a single dollar had been spent on Clara's well-being. Instead, the money had funded spa renovations and social club memberships, all while Clara slept in a cage. She used her own stepdaughter as a profit center," Victoria said, her voice hardening with each word. The former foster child in her recognized the particular cruelty of monetizing vulnerability. Within hours, the evidence was in Judge Mr. Sims's hands. The usually stoic jurist removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose as he reviewed the documentation. "This changes everything," he admitted to the court clerk. "Prepare for an emergency hearing." News of Monica's forgery spread through Elderbrook like wildfire. The town's carefully maintained veneer of propriety cracked as residents were forced to confront the darkness hiding behind white columns and manicured lawns. Parents who had once sought Monica's approval at school functions now deleted her contact information from their phones. At the emergency hearing, Monica's attorney attempted to explain away the forgeries as administrative oversights, but the evidence mounted against her. The charitable foundations, horrified by the misappropriation, filed separate charges. "I trusted you with my daughter," came a voice from the back of the courtroom. Major Holt had joined the proceedings via video call from his military hospital bed, his face drawn with grief and rage. "While I was serving our country, you were abusing our child and stealing money meant for her care." Monica's carefully constructed facade finally collapsed under the weight of irrefutable evidence. Her legal claim to Clara disintegrated before everyone's eyes. Back at Victoria's estate, Clara sat in the art studio, unaware of the day's developments. She carefully painted another fox, this one stepping out of a dark forest into sunlight. Jasmine watched from the doorway, knowing that soon they could tell Clara that her cage doors were permanently unlocked. The courtroom fell silent as a man in a tailored suit approached the witness stand. Richard Barnes, Monica's ex-husband, straightened his tie before taking the oath. His testimony sent ripples through the gallery. Years ago, his son had endured similar disciplinary measures at Monica's hands. "She called it consequence training," Richard explained, his voice steady but strained. "My boy would be locked in dark spaces when he failed to meet her standards. I discovered it too late, after the divorce was already finalized." Clara sat beside Victoria, her small fingers tracing the outline of a fox on her sketchpad. The philanthropist placed a protective hand on the child's shoulder, their bond visibly strengthened through months of healing at the estate. Jasmine, seated just behind them, maintained her meticulous documentation of each testimony, her experience as a former child advocate evident in her focused attention. The prosecutor presented medical records from Richard's son, evidence that had been buried during their divorce settlement. Ms. Barnes agreed to relinquish custody claims in exchange for Mr. Barnes's silence regarding these incidents, the prosecutor explained. 3 former household employees followed, each recounting disturbing patterns they had witnessed. A former nanny described finding Clara locked in a closet. A gardener recalled hearing crying from the garage. A housekeeper testified about Monica's obsession with maintaining appearances while neglecting Clara's basic needs. Judge Mr. Sims, who had initially approached the case with skepticism about media influence, now leaned forward in his chair. The consistent pattern of testimony had clearly affected him. He removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose as he studied the growing mountain of evidence. In the gallery, Elderbrook's elite shifted uncomfortably. The town's carefully constructed facade of perfection was crumbling before their eyes. Several board members who had initially supported Monica now avoided eye contact with her, the social distancing as obvious as it was swift. Monica sat rigid at the defense table, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms. Her attorney attempted to discredit each witness, but the pattern had become undeniable. The woman's carefully crafted image, that of the devoted stepmother and community pillar, was disintegrating with each new testimony. Victoria exchanged a meaningful glance with Elena, who had warned her friend about the challenges ahead. The courtroom battle was taking its toll on everyone, but especially on Clara, whose nightmares had returned as the trial progressed. As the day's proceedings concluded, Judge Mr. Sims announced, "This court will reconvene tomorrow to hear additional testimony." The gavel's sharp crack echoed through the room, sealing Monica's fate as Elderbrook's fallen angel. The call came at 3 in the morning. Victoria Dane answered with the alertness of someone who rarely slept deeply anymore. The military liaison's voice was formal, but carried an undercurrent of relief. Major Holt was alive, injured, but stable and conscious, and he was coming home. "He knows nothing about the situation with his daughter," the liaison explained. "Due to his injuries and recovery, we've been unable to brief him fully." Victoria paced the moonlit hallway outside Clara's room, her silk robe whispering against the hardwood. How would she explain to this man that while he fought overseas, his daughter had been locked in a cage like an animal, that the woman he'd entrusted with his child had betrayed them both so completely? 3 days later, a military transport delivered Major Holt to Elderbrook Memorial Hospital. Victoria met him there, introducing herself with quiet dignity. The soldier's face was gaunt, a healing scar running along his jawline, but his eyes remained sharp and questioning. "Where is Clara?" were his first words. "Safe at my estate," Victoria replied, sitting beside his hospital bed. "But there's much you need to know before you see her." For 2 hours she methodically presented the evidence. Photographs, court documents, Clara's drawings, the forged guardianship papers. The major's hands trembled as he examined each piece, his military composure crumbling. "I trusted Monica completely," he whispered, a tear tracking down his weathered face. "I sent letters every week." Clara never responded. Monica said she was angry with me for leaving. "She never received them," Victoria explained. "We found them hidden in a storage unit." When Jasmine brought Clara to the hospital the next day, the reunion was tentative. The girl stood in the doorway, uncertain, clutching her latest fox drawing. Major Holt, despite his injuries, struggled to sit straighter in his bed. "I didn't know, Clara," he said, voice breaking. "I swear I didn't know." Clara approached slowly, studying her father's face, as if relearning it. "Did you write to me?" "Every week," he confirmed. "I never stopped." That evening, Judge Sims received an unexpected visitor in his chambers. Major Holt, against medical advice, had checked himself out of the hospital to make a personal statement. "I fully support Victoria Dane's guardianship petition," the soldier declared. "Until I'm recovered, my daughter needs stability. Miss Dane gave Clara what I couldn't, protection when she needed it most." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "Your presence changes things considerably, Major." Indeed it did. By morning, Monica's attorneys were scrambling to adjust their strategy. The narrative of the troubled child and the interfering millionaire collapsed entirely in the face of a wounded father's testimony. The grand ballroom of Elderbrook's Heritage Hotel sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the polished smiles of the town's elite. Monica stood before the mirror in the powder room, adjusting her designer gown and rehearsing her acceptance speech one final time. Tonight was the culmination of years crafting her perfect image. The prestigious Mother of the Year award would cement her standing in Elderbrook society. "You deserve this," she whispered to her reflection, ignoring the text from her assistant warning about increased police activity near the venue. The master of ceremonies tapped his glass, silencing the murmuring crowd of 200 guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to present this year's Elderbrook Maternal Excellence Award to a woman whose dedication to family values has inspired us all." Monica glided toward the stage, her practiced smile never wavering as applause filled the room. Several board members from local charities nodded approvingly, the same people who had dismissed concerns about her parenting methods for years. "Thank you for this tremendous honor," she began, voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "A mother's love knows no bounds, and I've always believed that discipline and structure are the greatest gifts we can give our children." The ballroom doors swung open. 3 police officers and a suited investigator entered, moving with deliberate purpose down the center aisle. The socialite faltered mid-sentence, her knuckles whitening around the crystal award. "Monica," the lead investigator announced, loud enough for all to hear, You're under arrest for child endangerment, fraud, and falsification of legal documents." Gasps rippled through the audience as the officers approached the stage. One of the charity directors dropped her champagne flute, the shattering glass punctuating the moment. "This is absurd," Monica hissed, backing away from the microphone. "Do you know who I am in this town?" The investigator reached for his handcuffs. "We know exactly who you are. We have the forged guardianship papers, the falsified therapy records, and testimony from your former husband about previous abuse." As they led her through, the stunned crowd, Monica's carefully constructed world, collapsed around her. Phones captured every moment of her downfall. The same devices that had once documented her perfect charity galas now recorded her disgrace. By morning, her name had been scrubbed from every board and committee in Elderbrook. The country club revoked her membership. The wellness spa she frequented issued a statement distancing themselves from her actions. The town's carefully maintained facade had finally cracked, revealing the rot beneath its polished surface. In Victoria's estate across town, Clara slept peacefully for the first time in years, unaware that justice had finally arrived in a ballroom full of witnesses. The cherry blossoms on Victoria Dane's estate had begun to bloom, their delicate petals catching the spring breeze, as Clara Holt sat cross-legged on the lawn. 4 months had passed since her rescue, and the bruises had faded from her skin, though certain shadows still lingered in her eyes when doors closed too loudly. Victoria had channeled her resources into establishing the Invisible Children Foundation, dedicated to exposing and preventing non-physical abuse in privileged homes, the kind that hid behind manicured lawns and social standing. "The worst scars," she often told potential donors, "are the ones you can't photograph for evidence." Clara's artwork had caught the attention of another young survivor at the national exhibit. Lily, a girl with wild curls and a quiet determination, had recognized something of herself in Clara's fox drawings. The two had formed an instant connection, spending afternoons in Victoria's sunlit studio creating what they called The Girl and the Open Door, a storybook that translated their experiences into a tale of hope without diminishing the reality of their pain. "The fox found a key," Clara explained to Jasmine one afternoon, her voice stronger now, her hands steady as she colored. But the door was never really locked from the outside. Jasmine nodded, documenting this moment in her journal. The head of staff had become an essential part of Clara's support system, her calm presence a counterbalance to Victoria's passionate advocacy. A feature article about the foundation had caught the attention of a veteran journalist who, moved by Clara's story, began investigating similar cases across the country. Her reporting eventually led to proposed reforms in family court proceedings, creating ripples that reached far beyond Elderbrook's exclusive neighborhoods. Major Holt visited regularly during his recovery, rebuilding his relationship with his daughter one afternoon at a time. He would sit quietly in the corner of the studio, sometimes helping with the storybook illustrations, learning to communicate with Clara through art when words failed them both. The estate that had once seemed imposing to Clara had transformed into a sanctuary. Where silence had once reigned, now came the sound of turning pages, spontaneous laughter, and the occasional bark from the rescue dog Victoria had adopted, a gentle creature who never spent a moment in a cage. "You know what I love about spring?" Clara asked Victoria one evening as they walked through the garden. "Everything gets another chance." Victoria squeezed the child's hand gently. "That's exactly right," she replied, watching as Clara ran ahead to examine a newly bloomed flower. The philanthropist smiled, recognizing that in helping Clara heal, she had found unexpected healing for herself as well. The courtroom fell silent as Clara Holt stood before Judge Mr. Sims. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The child looked smaller than her years in a simple blue dress, her hands fidgeting with the hem. "Clara," the judge said gently, leaning forward at his bench, "I have just one question for you today. Where do you feel safest?" The girl's eyes darted around the room, past Monica's perfectly composed face, beyond her father in his pressed military uniform, until they landed on Victoria Dane. The philanthropist sat with perfect posture, but her knuckles were white as she gripped her handbag. Clara took 3 small steps forward. Standing on her tiptoes to reach the microphone, she pointed directly at Victoria. "With the person who opened the cage and called me human," she answered, her voice clear despite its softness. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Jasmine, seated behind Victoria, quickly wiped away a tear while maintaining her professional composure. Major Holt nodded slowly, a mixture of gratitude and pain evident in his expression. Judge Sims removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. For weeks, He had sifted through evidence, the forged documents, the falsified therapy records, the damning security footage. But it was this simple declaration from a child that seemed to finally settle something within him. "I've reviewed all testimony and evidence in this difficult case," he announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Custody of Clara Holt is granted to her father, Major Holt, with joint guardianship assigned to Victoria Dane until his full recovery from injuries sustained in service." Monica's carefully maintained facade cracked. Her attorney placed a restraining hand on her arm as she half rose from her seat. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "Monica will face sentencing for documented fraud, child endangerment, and abuse. The court recommends the maximum penalty under state law." As the gavel struck with finality, Elderbrook's elite witnesses shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The town that had celebrated Monica at charity galas now watched her being led away by court officers. Her legacy, the committees she had chaired, the accolades she had accumulated, would be systematically erased. Outside the courthouse, Victoria knelt to Clara's level, just as she had that night in the garage. "We did it," she whispered. Clara nodded, reaching for both Victoria's hand and her father's. For the first time since the ordeal began, Major Holt smiled, a tentative expression of hope for their unconventional family's future. The grand hall of the Elderbrook Arts Center buzzed with anticipation as Clara Holt stepped onto the small stage, her hands steady around the colorful hardcover book she and her friend had created. The crowd fell silent as the spotlight illuminated her face, no longer marked by fear but glowing with quiet confidence. "This book is called The Girl in the Open Door," Clara announced, her voice clear and unwavering, "and I dedicate it to everyone still waiting for their door to open." She opened the first page, revealing illustrations that transformed trauma into art, each page featuring a small fox guiding a child toward light. As Clara read, parents and children leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the story of a girl who found her voice after years of silence. "Sometimes," Clara explained, looking up from the pages, "you have to be your own key, and sometimes someone else helps you turn it." In the front row, Victoria Dane watched with glistening eyes. The philanthropist had expected to feel the satisfaction of a rescuer, but instead found herself humbled by Clara's resilience. This wasn't about Victoria saving a child, it was about Clara discovering her own strength. Major Holt sat beside Victoria, his military posture softened by pride as he watched his daughter command the room. The months since his return had been challenging, rebuilding trust through patience and consistency. But tonight, seeing Clara shine, every difficult conversation had been worth it. Jasmine stood at the back, clipboard abandoned for once, simply taking in the moment. The head of staff remembered the frightened child who had arrived at the estate, jumping at shadows and hiding her drawings. Now that same girl was teaching others how to find courage. When Clara finished reading, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Judge Sims, who had presided over the custody case, nodded approvingly from his seat near the exit. Even he, initially skeptical of the media attention, could not deny the transformation before him. After the presentation, Clara signed books with her friend, laughing as they stamped each copy with a fox-shaped ink stamp. The proceeds would go to the Invisible Children Foundation, supporting kids whose abuse hid behind pristine facades. As spring bloomed across Elderbrook, the town's definition of family had evolved. The manicured lawns and white columns remained, but behind those doors, a new awareness had taken root. Children were being heard, not just seen. Clara caught Victoria's eye across the room and smiled. Not the smile of someone rescued, but of someone who had learned to rescue herself. In that moment, both understood that freedom wasn't just about opening cages, but about teaching others how to fly once. Released,